It is another edition of the book club with Tariro Ndoro tonight and myself, your host, Selena Zigomo. So as is my custom, I always like to start every book club with a quote from an African author. And today's quote is from Ai Kweyama, and Ai is the author of The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Alone, I am nothing. I have nothing. We have power, but we will never know it. We will never see it work unless we come together to make it work. And that's my quote for you, Tariro, and the quote that made me think of you and think of your work and the message behind your story. And so, Tariro, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Selena. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm especially excited to have this book club live with you because I've been going through your book, which I got, the book Agringada, like a Gringa, like a foreigner, poems by Tariro Ndoro. I don't know if people can see how awesome this cover is, but if you're following us on the Thando channel on Facebook, we posted it earlier on in the week. What an amazing cover and what an amazing read so far. So to those of us that are watching on YouTube and Facebook, please let us know if you read poetry often. And if you know what Agringada means and what language it's from, I'm going to have Tariro talk to us a little bit about that. And whilst you're putting your comments in on Facebook or YouTube, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our writer today. Tariro Ndoro is a poet and storyteller. She received an MA in creative writing from Rhodes University. Her debut poetry collection, Agringada, Like a Gringa, Like a Foreigner, Modjaji Books 2019 received the inaugural NAMA Award for Outstanding Poetry Book. Her poetry, short fiction, and creative nonfiction have appeared in a wide range of literary magazines and journals, including Afreada, the Kalahari Review, Kotaz, New Contrast, Oxford Poetry, and Puerto del Sol. Links to all her published works are available on her website, and I urge you to take a read through that amazing, amazing website. Tariro was shortlisted for the 2018 Babishai Niwe Poetry Prize. Sorry, I think I just butchered that. The DALRO Poetry Prize and the Intwasa Short Story Prize. Tariro has made appearances at Pa Gya Literary Festival, Page Poetry Alive, Paza Sauti, Poems for the End of the World, and Wordfest. And you are only just beginning. So that is quite an amazing biography. And tonight, we're also going to talk about her book, which is an honest exploration of dislocation and unbelonging in its forms, exile from language, exile from country, and exile from sanity. In her debut collection of poetry, Ndoro divides and intermingles national and personal history in an attempt to reach herself. Within its fragmented prose and lyrical poems, Agringada is not only a celebrated capture of language, but also of its intriguing subversion as it navigates meetings of class, gender, nationality, and race. So, Tariro, before we get into the book, which I have many questions about, can you tell us how you started writing? How did you first get into writing?
Okay, I think I first started writing when I was in grade 3. So I was an avid reader from an early age, and I think that I'll say grade 3 because that was the first point in time that anyone ever affirmed my writing. So we used to have allied arts competitions. I entered my story and it got a good prize. And from then on, I think I had the consciousness that, I want to be a writer. I want to tell stories. But in the midst of that, people always say, writers are poor, writers are struggling, writers are starving. So in my mind, I just always thought, I'll try and get some other sort of career, but then the writing will be something in the background. And then fast forward to the time when I got to university, I was studying science at the time, and I started just watching a lot of poetry videos online. And then I sort of caught the fire and I wanted to write. And I just had so much that I just kept on writing and writing and writing. But in that space, I felt that I didn't have a lot of opportunity or a lot of space to get published. So I remember the one time I wrote my play. I took it to a publisher in Harare, and they said, "We're sorry, we're not publishing fiction. We're just publishing what do you call these textbooks right now." So at that point in time, I really started having that hunger to say, I want to do this, but I feel that I don't have the space to do it. And then at the time, I met someone who was studying creative writing. I didn't know you could study it at the time. And I was very, very happy to find out that you could study it without having any sort of background in literature or anything like that. So then I did that course and I learned so much about writing. And after that, it just became more of a discipline. So before it was just sort of, oh, I feel like writing in my spare time. And then at that point in time, I decided I want to be serious about this. I want to send my work out to journals. I want to get in touch with publishers. And I just started thinking about it more as, a discipline than a hobby.
And disciplined you are. If any of you are interested, you can look up Tariro Ndoro on her WordPress site, tarirondoro-wordpress.com, and you will see almost the majority of her writings across literary journals and reviews. And it's actually a very interesting read and a very interesting, I think, example of what a full-time writer looks like. I've never met a full-time writer until I met you, as in somebody who's completely dedicated to the craft. And definitely, I think a full-time writer from a literary perspective. I think we have so few of those in Africa right now because we've got a lot of writers, but not necessarily all literary writers. So very interesting how you've managed to keep up that discipline and keep yourself self-driven and self-motivated through the process. So now let's talk about this power-packed dynamite offering that you have put together. And some of it is curated from previous works that you had published, and then other pieces in the collection are pieces are virgin pieces you created for this. Now, let's talk about how the book came about.
Okay, so the last quarter of the which is very weird, but the last quarter of the book I came up with while I was studying creative writing. So one of the requirements to actually graduate is that you had to come up with a book length it's a book length project. So I was thinking a lot about sorry, I don't know why there's an echo. I was thinking a lot about exile and nationality because that was the year 2015. And there were a lot of, I was living in South Africa, there were a lot of xenophobic attacks going on. And I was particularly interested in immigrant literature and, the immigrant experience. And then after that, I sort of just put it down because I got to a point where I was just trying to make it better, but it, for some reason, was fighting me. So I put it down for a while. And then I was thinking about exile a lot. And then the first half of the book came to me because I was thinking about exile from self and exile from identity. So I think the book sort of came to me in stages that, I was thinking first about, exile from nation. And then I was thinking about exile from, your identity. And then so I'd pick it up and put it down and pick it up again and, be inspired by other authors. I was reading a lot of Safi Al-Hilo's work, George Abraham, and they were just playing around because I know in the very first draft, it was just plain poetry. And then I realized that they were playing around a lot with, the forms, the way they were expressing themselves, the way they were expressing silence and being silenced. And then I just took it up again and decided, okay, this is how I'm going to shape it. And this is, how it's going to be.
Silence 100%. And it's interesting you mentioned silence and being silenced because there are quite a few interesting, I want to say forms or techniques of form you use throughout the collection to highlight that. And that's really, really cool. So let's just start now at the title, Agringada, like a Gringa, like a foreigner. I don't even know if I'm saying those terms right. So to me, those sound very Latin. And I know that at the beginning of the book, you give a little bit of a description, Agringada, an adjective resembling a foreigner. Now, there is quite an interesting intertextuality between what I want to call Spanish, as well as Spanish or Mexican, as well as Shona, as well as English. And of course, all of the nuances within the Shona and the English to do with sort of the colonization of education, language, and identity. So that's a lot there. And that's quite a brave title. Tell me now, as the writer, what that term means and what was going on. And we've got Lucas from Nairobi. It's good to have you back again. Hi, guys. Lucas here, tuned in from Nairobi, Kenya. Wonderful to see you, Lucas. Anyone else watching, we're happy to hear from you. Give us a shout out in the comments. But Tariro, tell us about the title.
So the title, it's interesting because at first that wasn't going to be it was just going to be the section title for the first part of the book. How I came upon it is that I was reading a lot about, okay, so in context, right now, a lot of Africans are writing. So when I say right now, perhaps the past 10 years, a lot of Africans are writing about exile and, leaving the country, going, to the States, to the UK and all of that. But about 40 years ago or so, that's the sort of content that was coming out of Latin America. So a lot of people in South America were already writing about, the politics of kind of living in the US as a Spanish person. And one of the points at which that conflict came about was the point of language. So I think you might have seen videos where people are speaking in Spanish and people are like, go back to your country, this is America, speak English. So there've been a lot of papers written about, the sort of assimilation people have to acquire. And, one example of that is that, someone who is from Mexico, who's from the Dominican Republic, they get to America and they have to learn how to speak English like a white person. And what often happens is that when they now go back to their families or when they now go back to their countries, their home countries, people then say you are acting or you're speaking Agringada, which is to say you are now speaking like a white woman. But then also what that could mean is that you're now speaking like a foreigner because the term gringo or gringa means both white person and foreigner. So in that space, when someone then says, Selena, you're acting Agringada, it's like basically your family is saying you're acting foreign to us, as in you're no longer a part of us. So there's a form of othering there. And I wanted to have that term in the book because, the first half of the book talks a lot about racism and the second half of the book talks a lot about, about xenophobia. So, that tension of both, the whiteness and the foreignness. And I wanted to bring that into the light.
You definitely brought it into the light because there's so many journeys in and out of that othering that is happening. And the othering is happening wherever you are. The othering is happening at home. I know in one of the poems in the first section, you referred to cousins mocking your accent or the way in which you would say something. And so you don't feel at home. And then, there are foreigners in your home who are then also making you not feel at home there. And then you leave and then you go through the same thing, but it's like in reverse. And it's a very Zimbabwean experience. And it's very interesting how you created that parallel with the Latin American experience. Another thing that I found very interesting, which I think follows on from the issue of language and context, is use of animals. So you've got some nice animal imagery in the book. What were you thinking about when you chose to use that as a literary device?
Okay, so part of it, I think, just came to me as when I was very young. There were a lot of these books about, the girl and her. She has a horse that she's keeping, and I think part of that just sort of stayed in my mind. And then when I was writing this, I was thinking of, I'm not sure which poem first came, where I wrote something and I was thinking a lot about the words we use to describe tongues, and tongues being a metaphor for speech. But a lot of those metaphors can be applied to horses. So in the same way you bridle a tongue, you can bridle a horse. In the same way your tongue can be free, a horse can be free. And I think when I was writing this, I actually had like a page where I had all these words in like a web, and some of them I've forgotten now, but that was the sort of thinking behind it.
What I found interesting is if we're looking at horses, is the poem entitled Mustang. Well, I want to call it a poem, but I think it's actually prose. And you do this quite a lot in the book, where you give us the etymology, or you break down a word in terms of its grammatical function and different derivatives. And you've got Mustang, noun, an animal that strays from Spanish, and from Spanish mesteno, feral, stray, undomesticated, from Latin mixta, animals with unknown proprietorship. And then mestengo, noun, the girl who has to hesitate before she speaks because she must double check that she's thinking in the correct language so that her words are not misconstrued. For instance, she must speak loudly in Shona, or else she is gossiping, but when she speaks English, it must be soft and civilized. I was curious as I was reading many of the poems, that a lot of what you describe is relatable to anybody who grew up in the education system in Zimbabwe over a certain period of time. And I would say in the education system, if they were learning in a particular social strata of that education system, this would be very, very relatable. But how did you make those links with those words? Because further down in the poem, you've got mestengo, noun, a girl of vague ownership, wild adrift, but not entirely. And there is a development of the word, and it almost mirrors what happens as terms change and evolve over time in language, across all languages. What was your motivation behind that? And also the connection between what I would say animals and the girl child.
Okay, with animals and the girl child, I think that horse metaphor was, all I was really thinking about. But in terms of language, I think I went on a little bit of I don't know what to call this. I went down a rabbit hole because I think someone gifted me actually a Spanish English dictionary. So this was when I was reading a lot of South American poetry. Someone gifted me this Spanish English dictionary. And the other part of it is that I had started reading Safia El-Hilo's poetry, and she plays around a lot with like definitions and things like that. And then I remembered in that space that when I was younger, I had this very expensive dictionary that, would really tell you this word comes from the Greek, it comes from the Latin, it comes from this. And, just as I was sitting, and I know people make fun of people who read dictionaries, but, and I think with that Mustang poem, really that unknown proprietorship and vague ownership, I remember reading that and thinking, this is what I'm trying to say. So that's part of it. Another part of it was also when I was reading a lot about the way terms so like in Texas, for instance, I think the word I'm trying to think of the word vaqueros, but I'm forgetting where it comes from. But it has so many jumps that the Spanish people had one word and then they brought it to Mexico and then it got another word and then it jumped into English. And I was thinking a lot about colonialism in those terms that, for instance, as Shona people, we say things a particular way, but once Shona interfaces with English, it's like there's a new sort of third culture that's springing up. And with that third culture, there's a third language that's also springing up. So I think part of me wanted to put such things in as quote unquote Easter eggs. So I think some people might read it and catch onto it and some people might not. But I think it was also just an outpouring of my own geek tendencies around linguistics.
Well, I mean, I know you call them geek tendencies, but I think you've been very skillful in bringing them across in a way, that does make us think, because I noticed that progression as you kept unpacking the term, and I was like, whoa, there's a loaded statement, a loaded statement is being made here, people. And I was like, oh, very, very deeply, deeply profound. But I think something we all need to think about, because I think what is clear is that there is an awakening, but there's also a purging in the book, because I mean, I can't get over this feeling of it being a biography in poems or a memoir in poems, because you trace the thread from your primary school years all the way to university years. And with it, the different cultures that you interface with. Later in the book, we start to get some Indian references as well. And I'm just like, there is something that connects us all together. In our, I think, it's not a shared experience, but I think our shared memory of what colonization has done to different pockets of people all over the world and what that looks like. And we all feel it when it comes to language, right? And so it's very, 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 very interesting to me how you've unpacked that through the book. But if you go through the book, it's almost like a story, and you section the book using markings of time or seasons. And that is also interesting to me, was that to follow the trajectory of your life, going from primary school to your time out away from home and being older, and being a young adult and becoming a little bit more awake and aware. Or was it about looking back on your past with the eyes of an adult? Because I also feel like that perspective is definitely there. Because, I wonder if the 10-year-old you or the 15-year-old you would have phrased or narrated some of those experiences in the same way. And then you speak also in the poems about real people, and how did you navigate the personal and the private, and respecting the privacy of others when you were talking or sharing about them?
I think I used a little bit of creative license. So in as much as it's a little bit of a memoir, there are parts of it that are, switched out, parts of it that are changed, parts of it that are obscured. So a lot of the names, I know before this we were talking about Lorraine. That's actually not her name. So like a lot of people's names I tried to switch out. And I think I tried to be more faithful to the feeling than to, the actual events that occurred. So that's one of the things that I was thinking about. Like, how do I, put this there and make sure that people get the message, so that it's not just about, what happened to me, but it can be more of a collective feeling or a collective experience.
Yeah, totally true, totally true. And yeah, I've read different collections of poems, and I never quite come across one that was also faithful to kind of like a memoir type narrative. So I felt like I was reading a very lyrical story. And I really, really enjoyed. Really enjoyed that about your book. So thank you very much for doing that. And then as we're coming towards like the last, I would say, quarter or few minutes of the show, usually we ask for a reading. I just want to delve just quickly into the experience of publishing in Africa as an African female author. And it's interesting to me, this is, I really want to highlight this because your publisher is Modjaji Books. And Colleen Higgs, who I think is the founder and managing director there, is very passionate about bringing stories and books from African female authors to the world. And looking at the catalogue of titles she has, she's really doing this in a really formidable an amazing way. And, I think, she's one of the few publishers, we'd like to applaud and kind of put up there on the same level as our own Irene Staunton from Weaver Press and, the ladies over at Blackbird Books. Colleen Hicks, to me, was quite a pleasant discovery to make. But even with that support, even with that perspective and that kind of framing of there was a vision and an intent to bring your story out and to really get the narrative of the African female author out, how has the process of publishing been from that perspective and entering markets in Africa from that perspective?
Okay, before I answer that, I just want to comment on, because you're saying, it sounds very lyrical, and I think someone I fell in love with, in my writing journey is Claudia Rankine, and she writes these books called American Lyrics. So part of the book is poetry, and then she has lists, and then she has prose, and then so I think that also kind of inspired, the way my book was packaged. And then in terms of publishing, I think it's difficult. I'll say it's difficult. I was lucky to find someone to publish my book, but for a lot of Zimbabwean authors, the reality, especially for poetry, because I think you spoke about Irene Staunton of Weaver Press. I think they do novels and short story collections. So for a lot of people who are poets, the only sort of option is self-publishing, and self-publishing is hard, from an administrative perspective, because, you have to think about talking to printers, talking to editors, talking to distributors. And for a lot of people who don't have the correct mentorship, because I know a lot of people look down on self-edited books, and the reason for that is that sometimes people don't always have the correct mentorship for someone to say, you need someone professional to do your book cover. You need someone professional to edit your book. And it's not just proofreading, it's, from the developmental stage. So I think that's a difficulty that we have in Zimbabwe. And then also in terms of distribution, I think I've been talking to a lot of people, both people with small presses and people who are self-publishing, who are just like, we don't know how to get our books out there, outside of actually, doing the footwork and going yourself to a bookshop to innovate, to say, this is my book, please may you carry it. And I think that also becomes a problem logistically when it comes to exporting books, because I think I also had a similar problem. So, in South Africa, the distribution's great. And then in Europe, I think African books collectives, they're doing a good job of taking books from small and independent publishers and like putting them out there. But trying to get, say, from Zimbabwe into Uganda or into Nigeria, very difficult. So it then becomes one of those things where you have to ask a friend, can you please take this to this person? Or then, having to get your own transport and, from a financial perspective, if say you have a book that's costing $10 and it costs $20 to ship a book from here to Liberia, then you end up just not shipping it to Liberia. And, I think that's the biggest challenge that I'd say most Zimbabwean writers have right now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a huge challenge. For any of you watching who may be curious about where you can get a copy of Agringada, you can look up Books Fantastic on Facebook. On social media, they will happily get you a copy at a very affordable price, and it's well worth it. And for those of you that are based in South Africa, you can look up the book on Modjaji Books, and they have a delivery system and a booking system for the book. You can also contact Tariro on Tariro Ndoro -wordpress.com and get details of how to get the book to you. It is also available on Amazon in Kindle format and print on demand format. So for those of you that are not in the places I've mentioned, you can also look it up there. So the book actually is widely available, and I can see why, following your response regarding distribution and getting it out there, you've had to think through quite a lot of these things and find hubs where you can get the book out to people. And I also just want, before we wrap up, to just have just a brief chat about impact. How have you felt the book has been received? Have there been any pleasant surprises or not so good surprises? I noticed that in comparison to some of the authors we've had on the book club, your digital footprint is exquisite. And I'm sure that is kudos to your publisher, Modjaji Press, because your footprint, your publicity is really, really good online, which I think is very key in the times we're living in. But what about the impact has been a pleasant surprise for you, and how has the impact of the book been for you?
So it's been mixed, I think, very up and down. So I think when it first came out, there was just, a lot of messages. And then since I'd say the 6-month mark, there are times when it's quiet, and then there's times when people reach out to me. So it's an interesting thing that I think at times people say, oh no, like now you're a published author. And sometimes I forget, like there are days when I actually literally forget. And then there are days when, something happens that's beautiful. I think one of the things for me that was completely surprising was when my book was nominated for the NAMA Awards. I remember entering it in as, I think it was entered for the first book award. And then when the list came out, it was now in the poetry category. And I remember thinking, why is it now in a different category? And then later on, because at that point in time I'm walking home, I'm thinking about a lot of things, then I get home and I look on Twitter and I saw that Bettina Gap. I was like, oh, it's such a good thing that they've split the categories from all the books being together to books and poetry. And I hadn't realized, so I was like, oh my goodness, so this is like a historical thing and I'm part of it. So that for me was a huge thing. Another huge thing was, sometimes I get, Zimbabwean, like a friend I went to school with read it and he was like, oh my goodness, this is like so triggering. I can relate to it. But then I've also had people who are not Zimbabwean who are like, actually in my country, this also happened, or actually in this place, this also happened. I know at some point in time back in between 2003 and 2008, we used to go shopping in Botswana, and like there were a few xenophobic incidences. And I remember writing 1 or 2 poems about that. And a friend of mine who's from there. So the weird thing is that a lot of people will say, South Africans are xenophobic, but I actually have more fear of being in Botswana because I've had more personal incidences. And one of my friends who's from there, like, read that, and she came up to me and she's like, I really felt that. I feel like, there's so much work that needs to be done. So also just seeing that there's also that side of, someone not just saying I can relate to this, but someone saying, you know what, I've read this. I feel that there's work to be done. I'm sorry that, you've experienced this in my country. So yeah, different forms of validation, I'd say.
Amazing, 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 amazing how you have given us the broad spectrum of the impact of the book. And it is a book that is triggering. But I think it's that triggering is a wonderful invitation to do things, to do better, to do more. And to start to be intentional about that. And it's also a wonderfully educative treatise on xenophobia, because when you get to that section of the book, you realize that it doesn't need to be physical violence on the basis of prejudice for it to be xenophobia. It's attitude. It's creating an atmosphere that intimidates one into silence, or manipulating that silence in different ways. And it's both structural, it's systemic, and it's even the feeling we create when people walk into our establishments and things like that. So well done to you for adding value and richness to the knowledge around that, so that we can be aware and we can start to catch ourselves. And think, because it goes both ways, we're also xenophobic to each other at home, and even in our own families. So very, very interesting, and very, very interesting journey that is the book. Thank you so much for joining us. And as is our custom, as we come to the end of every show, we always ask for a reading from the author. So what have you prepared for us today? Please go ahead and read for us and our viewers.
Hey, thank you so much for your kind words and inviting me. I'm going to read a poem called Hyssop, because you mentioned earlier about purging and healing. So I think this poem for me is quite healing. Purge me with hyssop and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Psalms 51:7. Wash me with hyssop and I will be clean. Kelly's Beach, 2014. My fascination is with the sound of the ocean, the rolling, rushing waves, as in stuffing fingers in my ears and hearing the blood rush. My wonder lies with cargo-carrying ships blowing foghorns in the harbor. Love, let us swim in salt water. Wash me with hyssop and I will be clean. Do black girls have dandruff too? The stray memory pushes to the surface. Must have been 14 years ago. The smell of heads and shoulders, hot water, hostile showers, but it's the white beach sand in my hair that sends me there. Wash me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Sometimes a big wave knocks you out, sends you tumbling underwater, washing you onto the beach like seaweed or litter. Life can be brutal this way. Storm's River Gorge carries the broken dreams of the Eastern Cape's broken dreamers. And how many times did you try it? There are no secrets here. Did you ever succeed? Wash me with hyssop, and I will be clean. You have forgotten your family name, says father. Let us sing of conches and kings. He plucks a conch from the ocean, asks if I know what it means. A spiral tattooed to the bodies of ancient kings. He who has the conch rules them all. And that is your name, he says. That is who you are, my child. Wash me with hyssop, and I will be clean. The wind and the waves and the Indian Ocean, your soul, even floundering, even treading water, even spat out by a mighty wave, with white sand granules stuck in your braids. You are absolved now. You are made clean.
Well done. That is incredible, 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 incredible. And thank you so much for signing us out with that incredible, thought-provoking missive. To all of our viewers, thank you for joining us. And whenever you catch this, even those of you that watch after the show, we'd love to hear your comments. Please don't hesitate to put them in the comment box. And we'll be back again next week, Wednesday, with yet another amazing African female author. Thank you, Tariro. We look forward to your next offering. And we are much, much more enriched and better, I think, prepared and equipped to do better and to do more as we deal with the issues of identity, language, nationhood, and femininity. So thank you very much. And we will be back here as per usual on Wednesday, 7 p.m. on Facebook Thando channel, as well as YouTube. Good night, everybody.
Okay, thank you for having me. To everyone in the comment section.
Amen. Thanks. Thanks, Tariro. Bye, Munya, Tatenda, Lucas. We'll see you all again next week.